Good afternoon and happy Juneteenth. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this presentation. And I want to give a personal thanks to President and Dean McGrath, who invited our school when he first came on board to celebrate and participate in a Juneteenth program. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to President and Dean McGrath, who will then introduce our esteemed speaker, Judge Rowe. Take it away, President Dean McGrath.
It's my great pleasure to do so. Although I have to say that I don't think you could have a better introduction than Professor Kisbeth just gave. I feel just not up to the task after that. That was amazing. But Judge Kwamé Rowe, he's a circuit court judge in the Sixth Circuit Court in Oakland County, assigned to the criminal civil docket. Judge Rowe is appointed by Governor Gretchen Whitmer and took the oath of office on August 13th, 2021. Judge Rowe is the fourth African-American judge to serve on the Oakland County Circuit Court bench and is the second African-American male. Prior to taking office, Judge Rowe was a special assistant prosecuting attorney at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office. His last assignment as an assistant prosecutor was in the trafficking unit, where he prosecuted human trafficking, complex narcotics, and homicide cases. Prior to the prosecutor's office, he was a judicial clerk for his predecessor, the Honorable Leo Bowman. He's also served as a legislative aide for the Michigan House of Representatives. Judge Rowe lives in Pontiac, and he graduated from Pontiac Northern High School. As a senior in high school, Judge Rowe had his first contact with Cooley Law School. Deans, professors, and law students taught a street law program at Pontiac Northern High. And during the street law program, he was assigned to assist Dean Joan Vestrand. And through the program, Judge Rowe became the first high school student from the city of Pontiac to participate in a General Motors legal internship. That internship is a pipeline program for young people of color who are interested in the law. Although Judge Rowe had to ride several public buses from Pontiac to Detroit, he completed the internship, and I am told was never late. And because of his great participation, the program has been offered to other interested Pontiac high school students as well. Eventually, he attended Michigan State University, where he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from James Madison College. And while at MSU, Judge Rowe studied social relations and policy and political theory and constitutional democracy. And of course, he earned his Juris Doctor from Thomas M. Cooley Law School. Judge Rowe continues to mentor high school students and remains active in his community. He's been featured in the Oakland Press, State of Michigan Bar Journal, the Legal News, Detroit News, the Oakland County Bar Association, Latches, and other news and legal outlets. Judge Rowe is married and has 4 children. Oh, and we'd be here all day if I kept going, but everyone, please join me in welcoming Judge Rowe.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Dean McGrath. I truly appreciate that welcoming and warm welcome. And thank you also to all of my former professors that I can see on the screen. I just wanted to say good morning and good afternoon to all of you. It's good to see your faces because I haven't seen you in a couple of years. As you all know, we've been in the midst of a pandemic, so it is great to be here, and I'm excited for this event. And so first off, good morning to everyone, and I should say good afternoon. It is now 12:03. First off, I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Cooley Law School, for putting on such an amazing event to spread awareness about Juneteenth, and not only spread the awareness about Juneteenth, but also spread awareness about the importance of law students in our community, and to spread awareness to these law students that are on the screen of what they can do in the future to help break down social barriers. And so, as you all may know, that in June of 2021, Congress passed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, making Juneteenth a federal holiday. In fact, we just received information from the Michigan Supreme Court just a couple of weeks ago, advising all courts that we are not to work on June 20th, even though June 19th is Juneteenth, because it's being recognized as a federal holiday. And so all courts, we will actually be shut down this coming Monday to recognize Juneteenth as a federal holiday. So I just wanted to send kudos to the Michigan Supreme Court for recognizing the importance of this holiday. So I want to give you all a little background about Juneteenth. On January 1st, 1863, 2 years into the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. That proclamation declared that all enslaved people in the states currently engaged in the rebellion against the Union are and henceforth forward shall be free. And I just wanted to give an aside that Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in January 1865, and the amendment was ratified December 6th of 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation only applied to enslaved people in the Confederacy and not those in border states that remained loyal to the Union. During this time, the Union consisted of 20 free states and 5 border states. Those 5 border states included Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and then after 1865, it included West Virginia. During the Civil War, as some of you may be history buffs here, the Civil War was started as not as a movement to end slavery. It was a movement and started because the North wanted to keep the Union together. And so the North had the Union and the South had the Confederacy. And that's how it was separated. And as Northern troops advanced into the Confederate South, many enslaved people fled behind Union lines. Slaves that escaped the Union lines during the Civil War were referred to as contrabands. When the Civil War began, again, the main goal was to preserve the Union and not to end slavery. Slaves who escaped the Union lines early in the war were often returned to their masters. And so earlier on in the war, if you escaped and you thought that you were going to be safe behind Union lines, you were not safe. You were returned to your master. And obviously, if you're returned to your master after escaping, there are severe punishments for escape for slaves. And so at this time, to return these slaves back to their masters, it created a lot of chaos and a lot of violence, and it became a huge issue. It wasn't until Major General Benjamin Butler, he refused to send 3 fugitives back to the bonds of slavery. Major General Butler classified escaping slaves as contraband of war. That is, once slaves crossed Union Army lines, they were classified as property. All enemy property that fell into Union hands constituted contraband and would not be returned. And so, although property, the slaves, they were considered property, they would not be returned. Because of Butler's actions on August 6 of 1861, a federal policy was instituted that slaves were to be contraband of war if their labor had been used to aid the Confederacy in any way. And if found to be contraband, they were declared to be free. And so it took one individual to stand up for 3 other individuals. It took a general to stand up and say, this is not right. Something needs to be done. I'm not returning these individuals to slavery, because obviously if you return them to slavery, they will face a huge and severe consequence. And because of this individual's actions in standing up and doing the right thing and not returning these individuals to slavery, there was a policy created, an entire federal policy that was followed during the Civil War. Now, you may say, okay, well, what does that have to do with Juneteenth? How did we get to Juneteenth? Well, on June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln, federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people were to be freed. It wasn't until June 19th, 1865, that slaves in Texas had learned that slavery had been abolished. And again, I will note that the 13th Amendment was not passed by Congress until January of 1865. And it wasn't until June of 1865 that slaves had learned that slavery had been abolished. This entire time, they were subject to slavery, subject to caring for their masters, subject to the conditions of slavery, when in fact there was a proclamation that said that this should not be going on. And it wasn't until June 19th that they found this out. And so on the following year, June 19th of 1866, the freed slaves celebrated what was known as Jubilee Day. And Jubilee Day, they celebrated by singing, dancing, barbecuing, and other things to celebrate their freedom. And it's now called Juneteenth because it was actually on June 19th that this information was conveyed to the slaves in Texas. And so that's the reason that it's called June 19th. I'm going to give you a quote in the words of former President Barack Obama. Juneteenth has never been a celebration of victory or an acceptance of the way things are. It is a celebration of progress. It is an affirmation that despite the most painful parts of our history, change is possible. And there's still so much work to do. Now, again, this event focuses on Juneteenth, and I recognize and am cognizant that lawyers, and you law students are future lawyers, we're going to speak it into existence, that lawyers need to come from all walks of life, no matter their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or identity, or even disability. However, my comments today will focus on African Americans in the legal system, as today we are celebrating Juneteenth. According to the American Bar Association, as of 2020, Black lawyers made up 5% of all lawyers in the United States. This number was the same in 2010. As such, there was no growth or decline of African American attorneys in America for 10 plus years. Why is that significant? Now, it's good that there was no decline, but there's no growth. There needs to be growth if there's going to be a fair representation of the community. There's approximately 14.6 of the United States percentage of its population is African American. And I will also note that according to the American Bar Association in 2015, nearly 40% of incarcerated prisoners were African American. As such, there's not a fair cross-section of lawyers to represent the individuals that are going into the criminal justice system. I will also note specifically here in the state of Michigan, according to the State Bar of Michigan, Michigan resident attorneys attorneys that live here in the state of Michigan of African origin make up 5.8% of lawyers in the entire state of Michigan, which is consistent with the national number of African American lawyers. Again, it's important to understand these numbers because while we're looking to make progress, to have the same number of 5% is not progress. It's maintaining the status quo. And so it's important to understand, what can we do to spread awareness? What can we do to change this? What can we do to bring awareness to specifically younger people coming up through public school systems, private school systems? What can we do to expose them to the legal community? Now, I want to talk specifically about why this is important. Oftentimes, individuals come to court with different life experiences, different vernacular, different ways of thinking, and different life exposures. Different life experiences create direct and indirect barriers for these individuals, and they often lack trust in the legal system. For example, when I was a prosecutor on a domestic violence case, I was assigned to the Waterford District Court. And I remember going to court and arriving to court as I did every day with my box in tow. When you're a prosecutor, you carry banker boxes of files to court. And I remember arriving to court early in the morning. And as soon as I walked in, a court officer said, "Mr. Rowe, there is a victim in the adjacent room. She wants to speak with you." And she had arrived early just to meet with the prosecutor. She had no idea who the prosecutor was, and I had not spoken to this individual beforehand, as we were simply set for a pretrial. And so as I went in and I set my items down, I went into the adjacent room and I saw an elderly African-American woman. She had to be in her late 60s, early 70s, and she was sitting down. She had a walker in front of her, and she looked at me. And when she looked at me, I introduced myself. I said, "Hi, I'm the assistant prosecutor on your case." Immediately, she burst into tears, completely burst into tears. And I asked her, I said, "What's going on? Why are you crying? Is it something about the case? Do you need assistance? What can I help you with?" And her response to me was, well, I thought that when I showed up today, that I was going to be judged by someone who did not look like me. I thought that someone was going to judge me because of the circumstances that I find myself in. And what she explained was is that her son had significant mental health issues and that she thought that they were simply going to be judged on the color of their skin. And so when she actually said to me that when she saw me, it was a sign of relief. It made a weight come off of her shoulders because she saw someone that looked like her and that she believed because I looked like her that I would understand her circumstances better. And so I shared that story because it was one of the few times in court that I stood there and was speechless and I didn't know how to respond. But I took it with grace and I said, well, ma'am, you know, I'll be here, and we worked through this case and we were able to get a amicable resolution for her son. And it worked out well. But that's just one example of when I've gone into court and I've spoken to either witnesses or litigants, or even now as a judge. I often get feedback that the individuals that come into my courtroom now, that they feel at ease when they see that it's someone that looks like them on the bench. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be someone that looks like me. And so what I'm saying is that it has to be someone that understands people from other walks of life. You have to be able to take a step back, take yourself out of your own personal life, and look at it in an objective way and say, how can I help this person, regardless of their skin color, regardless of any disability, regardless of sexual orientation or identity? Take yourself out of it and say, how can I help this person? Treat that person like an individual. Now, and I will share something because I believe it's important at this time. Back at that time when I met this individual, this is 2015, 2016, I had been the only African-American male working at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office. And I had been told, I was not able to confirm this, but I had been told that I had been the first African-American male to work at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office in nearly a decade. And so the issue with that is that individuals weren't used to seeing African American males in that position. And so I was often confused with being a court clerk or being an assistant or being a secretary or even being a defense attorney because the individuals were not used to seeing African American prosecutors in court. And again, it's important to have people from all walks of life, but it's especially important for the African American community to see individuals that look like them. And so you may ask yourself as law students, what can we do to bridge this gap, to bridge this barrier? And number one thing I will state is being active in your community. It is very important from people of all walks of life to see you law students, to see you out in your community, to see you volunteering, to see you in schools. Oftentimes, I volunteer at schools and in community events. And again, these young people need you. They need to see you. And what they need to see is positive exposure in the legal community. What do I mean by positive exposure? A lot of times people come to court and this is their first time in court, their first time ever having to address an attorney, their first time ever having to address a judge. And they're in shock, they're in awe, they're going through a traumatic situation. And none of them come to see me because they just want to see me for the day. They come to see me because there's an issue that needs to be resolved. And again, because people see me at the worst time in their life, it doesn't help to spread awareness about the positives in the legal community. It will only support the negatives. That is, if I'm forced sometimes to put people in prison, and if that was your first exposure to the criminal justice system or the legal system, and the judge puts your loved one in jail or prison, immediately that loved one starts to say, I don't trust the system. I don't believe in the system because my loved one went to jail. My loved one went to prison. And they don't say, well, it's because of what my loved one did or allegedly did. They say it's the system that's against us. And so in order to change that narrative, we have to have positive exposure to the legal community before individuals get into court. We, as lawyers and law students and faculty and administrators, have to be in the public eye. We have to be in schools. We have to be at community events, because being at these events will create that positive exposure that individuals need to see before they have to see me in my black robe doing my job. And so I say all of that because, again, you can't be something that you can't see. And so these young people, when I go to these schools, I'm often saddened now. It used to be 5, 6 years ago, I would go into schools and say, raise your hand if you want to be a lawyer. And I would usually get in a class of 30 to 35 individuals, 3 to 4 hands raised, which for me at the time was good enough. If we can get 3 individuals, 4 individuals to say that I want to be a lawyer, great. Let's mold these individuals into future lawyers. As of late, and as of late means within the last 2 years that I have been speaking at schools, when I say, who wants to be a lawyer? Either I get one hand or sometimes no hands at all. And so that prompted me to start asking the question of, well, if you all don't want to be lawyers or in the law, what do you want to do? And the issue right now is with our younger people, especially in elementary and middle school, they have not been exposed to the legal profession. What they've been exposed to is individuals that they see in social media, on television, and they have this in their mind that they want to be athletes, they want to be musicians, they want to be singers and dancers. And so I always try to redirect that and say, well, what about education? Education is important. And what's happening right now, and I've been seeing it in schools, is that education is becoming less of a priority. And being the exposure to the legal community is less in the schools. So people are being what they see. And so if you're in the schools as law students, lawyers, and administrators and professors, if you're in schools, especially our younger people, and exposing yourself to them and saying, you can do this, you can be something in the future that's different than an athlete or a musician or a professional basketball player or football player, you can be something different. They need to hear that, and they don't hear it enough. And it's incumbent upon us, as everyone in the legal community, we are all public servants. Every law student on this event today, you signed up to go to law school to be a public servant. And no matter what area of law you practice, you will be a public servant to someone, no matter if it's contract law, if it's criminal law, if it's environmental law. It can be any area of law, and you are a public servant. So as a public servant, it's important for you to be in the community. Now, you may ask yourself, well, does exposure work? Does this work? If I go into these schools and I speak to individuals, will that actually encourage people to go to law school and become lawyers? I can personally say that it works. As Dean McGrath mentioned earlier, when I was a high school student, Cooley law students actually came to my law school when I was a senior in high school. And they came every Saturday. We called the program Success on Saturdays. And it was for at-risk youth who wanted to go into the legal system. And what they did was they came every Saturday and they taught street law. That was important exposure for myself as an individual who thought he wanted to be a lawyer one day. And at that time, there wasn't much direction. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't know how to become a lawyer. You can do Google searches and you can look up things all day, but to hear it from a person's mouth on this is my path, this is what I did to become a lawyer, this is how I got into law school, that made a world of difference for me, because I started to see individuals that often did not look like me, but some that did, that cared about my success, that cared about my community. And these were law students. This is when the Auburn Hills campus was still open. Individuals who come from the Auburn Hills campus and go to the law school and expose themselves to the law students in a positive way. And it goes back to my earlier comments of positive exposure to the legal community. And through my experience, I was able to meet Dean Vestrin and Dean Nussbaumer. And through both of them, I was able to get a mentor at GM through the GM legal program that they had. And as mentioned earlier, I was the first individual from Pontiac to do that program. And I had to catch 2 buses starting at 4 o'clock in the morning to get there. But it was important. I could not have been exposed to this program without Cooley law students volunteering and coming to my law school, because Dean Vestrin and Dean Nussbaumer came because there were law students that also volunteered. And so they were there because of the law students. And it's actually a full circle now, because some of those same law students now practice before me as while I'm a judge, and they come in, and I've known them since I was a teenager. And so again, to expose individuals, young people, to the legal community is important. And by exposure, I mean taking them with you. Don't be afraid to take a student with you or a young person with you to court. Take them with you to law student classes. I actually brought a person to one of my law classes that I was mentoring, and this individual, and I'm trying to remember what class, I can't remember if it was torts or contracts, but this individual actually sat with me in my law school class to see if they wanted to even go to law school in the first place. But that exposure, that individual did not go to law school, but again, we can only try. You can only make the shots when you shoot the ball. And so for us, if you don't shoot and get into the community, then you can't make a shot. And so you have to keep trying. And so to expose yourself to the community means to actually go into the community and work hard and make an impact on these individuals, because again, it is important. And I'm going to mention this as well. Don't be afraid to mentor. Mentorships are important. I'll share another story with you. Earlier on before I actually became a lawyer and I was still in law school, I had an individual that I met at a barber shop. And so this individual, we went to the same barber, and my barber kept saying, well, I need you to meet this person. This person's going to make a huge impact in your life. This person can change your life. Unbeknownst to me, that this person was Judge Leo Bowman. And if you don't know, Judge Leo Bowman is now the judge. I sit in his seat. Literally, I am sitting in the seat that he sat in just a year ago. And I was exposed to him through my barber. And through my barber, I had Judge Bowman started to mentor me, and he started to say, come to court, come and watch me, come and see what happens in court. And I took him up on that. And by taking him up on his offer, I was able to secure an internship and then a clerkship, which eventually led to me being at the prosecutor's office. And he continues to be a mentor to this day. Young people need mentors. They need people to keep them on the right track. Often, some of my mentors, they call and just say, hey, I just want to check on you. I want to see how you're feeling, how you're doing. It's very important, especially in the legal community, to have a mentor and to be a mentor, because you are, again, giving information to young people who may not have that information available to them. You are helping knock down that barrier of individuals not having access to information. And a lot of this is lack of access to information, lack of access to, when we say lack of access to justice, that is the umbrella. But under that umbrella is the lack of access to information, the lack of access to lawyers that they can afford, and lack of transparency in the legal community. All of this needs to change if we want to make the legal community a better place and break down these social issues and create better social justice. And I will also note that one thing I will share with you is don't shy away from your story, excuse me. Share your story. And earlier on in my law school career, I was afraid to share my story because I was afraid of what other individuals would say about my path and how I came up and growing up in, not the best neighborhood and being poor and having family members who are felons and parents who struggled with addiction. So I always said, well, I don't want anyone to know this because I don't want anyone to judge me. It wasn't until one of my mentors said, you take hold of that story, you share it. And the reason you share that story is because sharing your story helps other people that have common interests with you. You never know what another individual is going through or has gone through. You don't know how these individuals were raised or what impacted them in their life. So don't be afraid to share your story, especially with those outside of the legal community. A lot of times, lawyers get the misconception that all lawyers grew up with a quote silver spoon in their mouth and they didn't have to work hard for anything. And I will tell you, every lawyer on this screen will tell you that is so far from the truth. Every lawyer has worked hard to get what they've gotten. So share your story. Make sure that people know lawyers are still people, that they're not just lawyers with this prestige of the name of being a lawyer, that we are still people that care about the community. And again, people who care about the community are more likely to impact that community than those who don't care about the community and aren't seen by the individuals of the community. And don't be afraid to stand up for change and remember why you went to law school. People go to law school for different reasons, but the biggest reason that most go to law school is because they want to see change. They want to help others and advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. If you keep this in mind at all times, and I mean, even, and I tell my kids all the time, do the right thing even when no one's looking. Keep this in mind even when no one's looking. If you keep this in mind at all times throughout your life and career, it will help advance social justice. Be like the individual that I spoke of earlier who stood up for the three slaves and would not return them back to slavery. Although these individuals did not look alike, he stood up for social change and social justice. And as I mentioned earlier, that impacted a federal policy that went in place, and a lot of African Americans benefited from that policy. I will state that there cannot be change unless there are people who are willing to fight for that change. Change starts with the community. Change starts at home with your family and sharing with your family what you do and exposing them also to the legal community. We need all law students, everyone, to bring their own individual identities, perspectives, and lived experiences to the law. That will make the legal profession a stronger and more prestigious profession. Thank you. That being said, does anyone have any questions?
If you do have any questions, please feel free to unmute. I can only see a select number of people on the screen.
And questions about anything. It can even be about how I became a judge or anything that you all have questions about.
It's Professor Vestrand. How's it going on the bench?
Hello. It is going well on the bench. It has been busy because we are now back to trials. And so I've been extremely busy. My prosecutor has been busy and the prosecutors assigned to my room have been busy. But it has been great. the change from being a lawyer to being a judge is different because you're no longer an advocate. And so you have to take off the advocate hat and put on the impartial hat and try to stay as best as humanly possible in the middle and just make sound and just decisions. And so I've been now a judge for a little over 10 months now. It's going quickly. And I can say that over this time, I've learned a lot. I've been exposed to a lot. I've had tough days where I said, "Oh my goodness, this has been a very rough day," and I've taken some days off where I said, "Okay, that was a rough sentence that I had to do." But all in all, I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else, and it's an amazing job.
Well, I'm really glad you're enjoying it. And, we're just so proud of you. And your remarks today are just spot on. And thank you for those.
Thank you, and thank you for everything that you've done. And as I mentioned earlier, Dean Vestron has known me since I was about 15 years old. And she was really my first exposure to the legal community. And so I thank you for everything that you do and continue to do and all of your support over the years.
Well, you're so welcome. It was nothing.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Mabel.
Okay, my question is, it is such an honor to have you speaking with us, Your Honor. My name is Mabel Martin Scott, and I am a contracts instructor. So I'm sure whoever you took your friend to was the contracts, because I'm sure they were, it was not the contract. They would have been excited and looking at the profession. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, I've been an attorney for about 100 years now. And a long time ago, I'm from Chicago, an African American, if you can see me, in terms of that. I taught at the Auburn Hills campus, but I never had the pleasure to have you in my class. But a long time ago, I actually practiced law in Evansville, Indiana, and it's the southern border of Indiana. And I was actually the only African American attorney. And I went to a town there with my suit and my briefcase, and I had everything ready. I was there to represent my client, and there was a judge there. And as I approached him, he said, "Is your attorney with you?" And my response, of course, was, "I am the attorney, Your Honor." And at one point, I was on the bench for a while, and I actually had a couple of instances where people asked me to recuse myself because there were some racial issues that were there. And my question, and hopefully you've not had the occasion to engage in those kinds of things, but have you come across anything that in your position, your short term presently as a judge, where you have had to address head on the racial issue?
Thank you. Not so much as a judge, as you may know, that as a judge, not a lot of people like to speak negatively towards judges and tell judges mean things. And so, not so much as a judge, but as a prosecutor, I face that all of the time. And especially, as I mentioned earlier, as being the only Black male prosecutor early on in my career at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, I was often confused with being a clerk, being a defense attorney. And I've had those issues come up where I had an individual put up the Black Power fist at me as they were leaving the courtroom. I had an individual call me an Uncle Tom and say that I was only there to prosecute their client because their client was Black. That the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office only sent me down there because I was a Black prosecutor to prosecute his Black client. And I've been stopped by the police while being a prosecutor and questioned about why I was in a certain neighborhood. In fact, it was a neighborhood where I get my hair cut, which I'm sure Judge Bowman also goes to that neighborhood. And so over the years, it continues to be an issue, not so much again on the bench because no one is willing to tell the judge anything like that to the judge's face, I'm sure. But as a prosecutor, it was really difficult. And I want to just kind of piggyback on that difficulty is that one of the biggest difficulties is that I didn't have someone that looked like me in my office that I could go to and ask questions and see how they dealt with this situation before. And luckily for me, I had great supervisors, great bosses that really took the issue seriously. But it made me uncomfortable to the fact that I had to call my dad and ask my dad, Dad, how do I deal with this situation? Because I don't want to be playing the race card, I quote, but I also will not allow someone to disrespect me in court or anywhere. And so I asked my father, how do I deal with this? And he's not a lawyer. He's never been in the legal community. And so what should have been happening is that I should have been able to go to a supervisor that looked like me or someone in the community as a mentor to say, this is what happened to me. How do I deal with this? And I lacked that at the time. And I think earlier on that made me a stronger prosecutor, actually, because I actually developed very thick skin from things that people just said, the hurtful things that people said over the years. So racism still exists, and it is still very prevalent even to today's date.
Judge Rowe, we
Thank you
have
so
a
much.
question in the chat. And it says, we're proud of you and appreciate how you represent our law school. What advice would you give to lawyers and judges handling high-profile cases like the Oxford shooter case?
Thank you. And I can't comment too much on that because I am the presiding judge on that case. So I won't make any specific comments as it relates to that case. But I will state just staying out of the limelight. Don't get on social media. Don't read comments. And just know, especially as a judge, that people aren't always going to agree with you. Every day that someone walks into my courtroom, someone loses. And so you can't please everyone. And so in high profile cases, you start to get letters from individuals and you start to get a lot of pressure. But what I will say, no matter the case, just be true to yourself, be true to your own ethics, and be true to what you believe in. And then you should not have any issues. And so for me, I try to stay out of the limelight. I don't read anything on social media. I don't talk about anything in the public because, again, I'm going to keep that separate from my personal life and keep whatever happens in court on the record and in the face of the public so they can see exactly what's going on. That leads into transparency. The public needs to know what's going on in court, especially in these high profile cases.
Judge Rowe, that actually leads to a question that I have for you. Given the pressures that you face and the pressures that you faced also as a prosecutor, but now that you're in the spotlight, how do you take care of yourself and your mental health because of the high profile cases that you deal with? But like you said, every day that somebody comes into your courtroom, someone loses. How do you take care of yourself? And what advice would you give to law students, as well as students who are admitted to practice, to take care of their mental health so that they can be of service?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. First thing I would say is take vacations. And I'm one of those severe type A personalities where I don't like to take time off work. I like to be there at work, working, and digging my heels into the ground and working even more. And what will happen to you is that you will look up one day and you will realize that you are absolutely burned out. And all of this hard work will be for naught because you will start to read things and you won't be able to comprehend. You will stand in court and not be able to think of your arguments because your brain is just so tired. And so take vacations, take that time off of work, take that time and just sit with your family and be a person. And so one of the things that I was told earlier in my career and that I live by today is remember that you have an on and off switch. When you are out in the public, remember to always be on. But when you are off and you are at your home, you can turn it off. You can be yourself around your family. You can absolutely do whatever you want to around your home. And for me as a judge, I have to be very careful because even when I'm off of the bench, when I'm in the public, oftentimes people see me and they recognize me and I don't know them at all. But they may say, "Hey, Judge Rowe, how are you doing today?" Or, "Judge Rowe, I saw you on TV the other day." and I will have no idea who this individual is. And so carrying yourself with prestige and with sanctity at all times is important. I often, my staff knows this, I share it all the time. For my family, my wife and I, we have date night every Tuesday. And so I share that because you should have a goal to look forward to, something to look forward to for the next day or in the next week. And so for us, it's date night every Tuesday. Where are we going to eat? What movie are we going to watch? Every Thursday is family game night. And so as you heard earlier, I have 4 children. So every Thursday is family game night. I want to sit with my kids and play board games and take off the judge hat for just a moment. And because to my children, I'm not Judge Rowe, I'm not Prosecutor Rowe or Lawyer Rowe, I'm just dad. And so remembering to spend that time with family is one of the most important things. And that's how I de-stress at the end of the day. And also working out, eating healthy. Don't forget to eat breakfast and lunch, because a lot of time lawyers and law students, we will work ourselves into the ground. We will skip lunch because we need to finish a brief. We will skip lunch because we need to get to court on time. Don't do that, because you're harming your body for later on. And so you have to take care of yourself.
Thank you, Judge Rowe. We also have some hands raised. I believe Dwayne has some questions. We have Dwayne, Erica Brightfeld, Dean Brightfeld, and Ross Ramsey. So
I do. Thank you, Jackie. And Judge Rowe, I'm going to keep my questions short. My daughter teaches English at an alternative high school in downtown Grand Rapids. She's inspiring to me because of the job she does, but she's challenged, I think, on a daily basis to present good role models for her students. Some of them they're being enforced by the courts. Their parole officer says you have to come to school every day. Do you have any advice I could share with her, or maybe a connection in Grand Rapids I can share with her?
Sure. And I will simply state it's, don't be afraid to reach out to prosecutor's office and judges' offices. A lot of times, judges and prosecutors and other lawyers will want to volunteer their time, and they just don't know how to do that. And so I would advise to have her contact some of the local area judges in her area and to see if they would be willing to come into the schools and to speak to the young people about exposure to the criminal justice system, and to speak with them about their actions and what they can do in the future. Again, it kind of goes to my earlier comment about being in schools, because we have to get our young people back on track. It is too many young people now that are falling off track and they have no direction in life. And so to get them back on track is to get into those schools. And so, Dwayne, what I will state to you is that have her reach out to people of the legal community, police officers, sheriffs, any individual that would be willing to walk into that school and share their story and to share their exposure to the system would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your story is very inspiring. It truly is. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the question.
Erica, did you want to go next?
Hi, Judge Rowe. It's great to see you. Happy early Father's Day to you, and thanks for being here. You definitely walk your talk. You have come to Cooley every occasion that we have had a moot court competition for probably since you graduated, probably a solid 5 years since you've been out in practice. Thank you for that. This question is for the benefit of myself as a professor and administrator and the rest of us at Cooley who teach here. How do you best advise us to message to students that we don't look like? So me, for example, as I don't identify as a minority. How can I message to a minority student that even though I may not look like them, that I could be your mentor, I could be a beneficial mentor to you or a safe place for you? Because I appreciate what you're saying about wanting to see people that look like you, but how do the people that don't look like the minority population reach those students?
Thank you for that question. And if you all don't know, I still call her Professor Brightfield as well. She was my writing professor in 3 separate classes. So I had her for research and writing, advanced writing, and moot court. So I go way back with Professor Brightfield. But I will state that don't be afraid to say exactly what you just said. That, hey, I may not look like you, but I am willing to mentor you. And again, and to me, I don't think anyone that looks like me would take offense of that for you to simply say, hey, I don't look like you, but I'm willing to mentor you. I'm willing to help you, and I'm willing to assist you throughout this legal journey of yours. And so putting yourself out there and letting yourself be accessible as you're very accessible, but putting that out there, because oftentimes, as I will tell you, as a minority student, I would look towards minority professors as mentors because, quite frankly, no one had ever told me that even though I don't look like you, I am still willing to be your mentor. So getting that out there is the very first step. And having those uncomfortable having those conversations about how they grew up, and it may put you in an uncomfortable position, and you may oftentimes may not be able to, I guess may not be raised in the same way, I will put it like that. But it's still important for them to be able to share their story with you, and for them to see that although you don't look like me, that you have my back and that you are here to assist me. Dean Vestrin doesn't look like me. She was there every step of the way. And I knew it because she never let me forget it. She would always say, hey, I'm here if you need anything. If you need anything, feel free to call me. And that's the way you go about that.
Thank you, Judge Rowe. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And the other question we have is from Ross Ramsey. Would you like to ask Judge Rowe your question?
Yes, I would. Thank you. But first, I'd like to start with a comment. And first, Your Honor, thank you for your time and being present today. And I see a lot of familiar faces from my time in Cooley. So I appreciate each and every one of you that's invested in my future. And I think to echo some of the points that previously made with regard to mentorship, I just wanted to give you your flowers while you're still here, Judge Rowe. When I was at Cooley, you were someone that I looked up to when I started my process. When I applied to the prosecutor's office, you were the only African-American male prior to me being there. And the importance of representation it's so important because of you opening the door. It opened the door for me. Now I was the only Black male in the office, but I'm hopeful that will change in the future. It shows what's possible, shows a path, and the importance of mentorship. My question, in addition to just giving you that, Judge Rowe, I appreciate what you've done for my professional career and us being able to have those conversations in the office when it wasn't necessarily an easy thing to do with colleagues or supervisors. My question more so is to the group as a whole, if there are other opportunities for mentorship in the legal community, I would love to be a part of those things because I see what it's done for me. Specifically, Dwayne, I think you referenced even someone willing to speak to students. That's something that I'm definitely interested in. But if there are other opportunities, I'd love if anybody could share those, just because I don't know of too many that are available. And I think it's really important that we have an opportunity to give back so others can have an opportunity as well. So thank you, Judge Rowe, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ross. And Ross and I go way back as well. And as Ross just kind of shared, by being at the time after 2016, I believe, it was myself and Ross at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office as the 2 African-American males there. And oftentimes we would share with each other, hey, man, how did you deal with this situation? Or he would come to me and say, hey, this happened in court. Have you dealt with this? And if you have, how did you deal with it? And I was able to share some of these stories and circumstances that I had and how to address those. So, Ross, I truly, truly appreciate that.
Thank you. Another question in the chat. What are your thoughts on our new U.S. Supreme Court Justice? And I know we're running short on time, but if you could give us your thoughts on that.
I am excited. As Ross just pointed out, you can't get to places without others opening the door for you. And so for me, it screams volumes of what I can achieve and what I can do. And so when I saw that, I was absolutely in awe because again, it showed me what me as a young African American judge, what I can achieve in the future, to just see her on the screen, even if she didn't become Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. I was going to say she tried, and just to see her there and the way she handled the questions from the Congress with grace, it just meant a lot to me. And it just opens up more doors for everyone else that not only that looks like me, but for women, for those who came from poor circumstances and background, they're able to also hear her story. And her story resonates with me, and I'm sure it does with a lot of individuals.
Thank you. And we have another question from Mark Dotson.
Before Ross, you still here? Can you shoot me an email at dotsonm@cooley.edu? Also is looking at getting back fired up again, and I think I'd like to have you speak to the group.
Absolutely.
Okay, I appreciate that. Your Honor, it's funny you mentioned Justice Brown Jackson. One of the topics that came up was her background as a criminal defense lawyer and how that might be a negative when it comes to her position in the court. And I thought it rounds out the court as a positive. So my question to you is twofold. One, how is being a former prosecutor, and I was one at one time, and I know how it changed me as a teacher. How has being a former prosecutor influenced you, at least in your opinion? And then two, when it comes to jury selection and trying to balance the jury and make sure the jury is representative of the community, what influence as a judge do you have in that jury selection process?
Thank you, and thank you for those questions. I'll take your questions in reverse. First off, as it relates to jury selection, as you all know, it's really up to the attorneys to voir dire the jury. I allow them to voir dire the jury, but I also listen very closely to the questions that are being asked of the jury. And so oftentimes I'm listening to make sure that there's no bias, that lawyers aren't dismissing jurors because of their skin color. And also after jury trial, after the case has been presented and the jury has reached their verdict, I always go back to speak with the jury to advise them. And first thing I always say, how was jury service? It always starts off with, I don't want to be here in jury service, Judge Rowe. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. And it always ends with, jury service was amazing. I am glad that I did this. And the way I spread awareness is by telling those individuals, go back to your family, spread awareness about jury selection, and that jury selection is not a scary process, and that you're not here to just be beat up and mangled. We don't want that. We just want a fair jury. And share with your family that when they say, oh, I have to go to jury service, and they say they are going to skip out or that they don't want to go, share with them the importance of jury selection and jury service, because it's important not only for the prosecution, as you know, but it is extremely, extremely important for the defendant to have individuals of their community to be in that jury box. And so again, the way I've been doing it is by sharing information with jurors and hopeful that they'll share that information with others, and treating the jurors with respect, treating them like people when they come here, and giving them the utmost and due respect, and making jury selection not a scary process, and making trial not a scary process. To also answer your question as it relates to being a prosecutor was invaluable experience. I tried numerous cases. I was in court every day. From the time I walked in court, I was literally litigating to the time I walked out of court. It gave me such a significant legal background. As a trial court judge, I need that background, because oftentimes in trial, things come up that I've experienced in my trial practice. And if I did not have that exposure from the prosecutor's office, I would not have known how to address that specific issue. Also, it makes me, at least in my mind, a little more compassionate. Because as you heard earlier, I did human trafficking cases, I did homicide cases, I did narcotics cases. And so for those who come in for crimes that are serious, but less serious as the cases that I just mentioned, I'm able to focus more on rehabilitation versus just strict punishment. And because of my exposure, I understand that this retail fraud first is not the same as a human trafficking. So I need to treat this retail fraud first with, I call them my kid gloves. I need to try to rehabilitate this person before trying to punish them in order to stop recidivism and keeping them from coming back. So I hope that answered your question, or questions, as to say.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. And congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Judge Rowe, I want to thank you again for your time. I know several people have a 1 o'clock meeting. I want to be mindful of time, but thank you deeply so much for sharing your time, your thoughts on this Juneteenth and sharing your story. If we could just give a round of applause for Judge Rowe. Thank you, everybody, so very much. Deeply appreciated. Thank you, and happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth, everyone, and thank you all for having me. It was my pleasure.